And good very early morning to United States. Here with us, Melissa Jurkoic. Good morning, Melissa. How are you?
And good morning. I am drinking my first cup of coffee. I'm doing great.
Yes, Melissa, can you tell us a little bit more about your women empowerment and how is it going with your project in the United States?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of volunteering on that side, mostly around mentoring other women that are trying to get into leadership roles. We also have an organization, Diversify Thinking, that is organizing some big events here locally. I'm over in New Hampshire in the East Coast of the United States to really bring a lot of women together to inspire each other.
Very good job. So today we're going to hear users don't have to suffer in the cloud. What are three main things we're going to learn today?
You're going to learn that what we've been taught about technology projects is probably all wrong,
All right.
in terms of who we're prioritizing. Hopefully, you're going to learn a different way to think about building user experience, and then finally, a way to know if you're doing it right. So how I always think that it's great to talk about things in principle and that sort of stuff, but if you don't have a way to measure it, you kind of walk away empty-handed. So hopefully, I'll give you a framework you can reference that you can make sure that you're starting to make incremental improvements towards embracing this lovely stakeholder that we tend to forget about.
Okay. Melissa, the virtual stage all over from Lithuania to US is yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. So we're going to dive right in. Hopefully you guys can see the slides. Are we showing those? Doesn't look like we are. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So again, my name is Melissa Jurkoic. Was a technologist, still am a technologist, been in technology for about 25 years. I was an engineer for a fair amount of that, worked into product management roles, synthesizing business requirements into technology, and then finally worked with the actual end users in a solution architecture role supporting sales. As we mentioned, I also am a big proponent of empowering women in technology and have founded a organization here in the US called Diversify Thinking that's focused around raising the level of conversation to meet raising the level of action rather to meet the level of conversation that we have had for years about diversity in tech and other spaces. So I'm here to talk to you about what I always call the lost stakeholder, the end user. So yes, I was an engineer for over a decade, but I'm not going to show you code today. I know this is a developer conference, so if you thought you were going to see code, I'm here to tell you I'm not going to show you code, but I'm going to show you a way to make sure that your code is actually being embraced and adopted by the people that are inevitably you're helping. So hopefully I'm not disappointing you when I'm not showing you any code on the screen. I'm sure that you've seen quite a fair amount of that. So this is a pretty big pill to swallow, so to speak. It really is saying, we as technologists, we get really excited about the next improvements in tech, whether that be making it easier to code, different coding languages, different platforms, IDEs, the ability to do things in different ways for mobile versus desktop, all of the things that we've been able to do. AI, like everything that's coming out, it's amazing, right? I get really excited about the next bright and shiny object too. I think the problem is if people don't actually embrace it, it all doesn't really matter. And I think that's, as a technologist, this was a hard thing for me to embrace. I can tell you, I spent years building things that inevitably didn't end up getting leveraged because we got the requirements wrong or because we were too late to the market or for whatever reason it was. But when someone doesn't actually get value from what you're building as an engineer, it's sort of deflating, I think, right? As engineers and developers, we're artists in our own right. We're creating something. And really, when we're creating those things, we want people to embrace them. We want people to use them. So why is this? So I told you at the beginning, one of the 3 points I was going to touch on was how we kind of are getting it all wrong when it comes to technology, especially what we call like digital transformation and moving from where you are today to something brand new. Technology allows us to do that really, really fast. The issue is we're always looking at it from a budgetary perspective, especially internally, right? This happens in big organizations. It happens in startups. I've worked across a couple of startups as well as in the corporate environment. I've seen it in both places. We rush to solution. We don't spend enough time in the problem space. And we're able to sell it really great to the executive stakeholder. So we get executive buy-in. So why is that important? Well, executive buy-in, usually if you're selling something as a startup, it's they're actually going to give you the money so that you can deliver it and then maybe, continue to bootstrap your business. If it's an internal project, you're getting executive buy-in from your C-level executives to be able to get the resources, the time, the technology, whatever it is you need to be able to make progress, to be able to deliver. Really important. I'm not dismissing the executive as an important stakeholder. What I'm here to tell you is there's another stakeholder that we forget about, and that's the end user. And the challenge is when you have executive buy-in, but you haven't focused on the end user buy-in, you can bring something all the way to market and feel really great about it, but then the users don't actually embrace it. And I think there's lots of examples of this across history. So I had someone ask me recently, hey, most of the technology that we're building today, do you think this will be obsolete by 2025? Well, 2025 is not too far away, right? So I thought, oh, that's interesting. So we're saying like, let's just say in the next 3 years, we think that what we're building today will be obsolete because technology and what's available to us to build is changing so rapidly and evolving so much. And I thought about this for a while. I thought it was a really good question. I think the challenge is it won't. And it's really back to that comment about if it doesn't matter how good your technology is if users don't embrace it. So I worked at a technology company that was focused on the hospitality industry, not different than the startup I work at now. We had products that evolved along with technology for years. We started with a product that was built on DOS. It went to Windows. I mean, like Windows for Workgroups, Windows, 95, 98, in the 2000s, finally, the latest version of Windows, transitioned that to a .NET version build in ASP.NET. And then from there, turned into a Salesforce app build in the App Exchange. So lots of different transitions, same product, lots of different look and feel to that, a lot of technology evolution. When I left that company, I worked at that company for 20 years. When I left that company, about a year and a half before I left, now mind you, as a technology company, any software business, right, you don't want to have to support that many versions back. That was a lot of versions and technologies, right? But I will tell you that regardless of the fact that we sunset that product, that initial product, back in the late 80s and early 90s, that was the DOS-based product. So I'm talking like shift keys, command line prompts. We did not get all of our customers off it until a year and a half before I left that company. So, 20 years later than what that actual product was built. So that's like kind of mind blowing, right? There's a product that's been in the market for 20 years and customers were still holding on to it. We weren't even supporting it anymore, but we couldn't get them to upgrade. We couldn't get them to move off. Why? Why is that? So that's an interesting question. So I thought about that a lot when someone asked me, why are people holding on to this technology? I don't think my slides are showing right now, but so the reason why we can't sunset technology and why I answered the question of will it be obsolete in the next 3 to 4 years is no, is because of the end users. I don't know if we can get my slide back up on so you guys can actually see these wonderful stakeholders that I'm talking about. But end users, they're the reason why we can't make technology obsolete, right? Because when something is used and it's adopted and they love it, or sometimes love to hate it, but they know how to use it, they're not going to just let it go. So as much as we love the next technology and we think the bright and shiny object is super fun, it doesn't matter if it doesn't get adopted by end users, right? And so you guys can't see this, but there's a few end user comments. I'll just read them to you, right? I'm being hit with all this change and I'm completely overwhelmed. These are comments that I've heard from end users, right? So they don't want to change. They want to do their job. Our end users typically are not technologists. They aren't interested in the next technology shift. They just want to do their job and they're used to what they're using and they don't want to incur change and have to learn their job differently or how to do their job differently. This new platform doesn't have all the features I want. I'll just wait for the next version, right? So people will be like, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to wait until the next version comes out. I'm good for now. They're totally fine staying where they are. And that usually even means when there's issues, when there's things that don't work as they should. It's just they've learned and adapted to work the way that the solution works. And they're just okay with that. So another example of that is, I just joined a startup almost a year ago now, Think. It's based in Belgium. I was the first US employee, and we're building a competitive solution to my prior employer, actually, here in the US. And as we approach going to market in the US for next year, some of the comments and the questions that I get from current customers that I'm starting to do market analysis around, they're like, well, what's different about what you're doing? And so trying to be compelling about that when we're competing against a solution that's been in the market for 30 plus years is challenging because they've already adopted it. They know how it works. They have challenges with it. They're struggling. They don't feel like it's innovative. They feel like they're using the same product they were using 10 years ago. All of those things they're frustrated with, but they're not necessarily ready to just flip a switch and make a change. So they need to understand, what's compelling about what you're doing. Why should I leave a solution that I've fully adopted that everyone understands, it's become a household name for the last 30 years to jump on board with you? So this end user stickiness, this adoption, it matters. It affects your business go-to-market strategy. It's affecting ours right now. So we need to think differently about how we're appealing to those end users to make it valuable to them, right? Not just the decision makers in the sales process. So again, like people are comfortable with old systems, they know the workarounds. So even if things are broken, they'll just work around them. They're used to it, right? And so humans are habitual creatures. They're just as happy to work around something that's broken than to try to learn something new that might work better. So they get very stuck in their ways. And then some people will try to use it. And if it's too hard, they'll just go back to the old thing, right? They'll be like, forget it. I'm just going to go back to the old thing. My husband's not a technologist, and also not tech savvy. And so he needed to do something just in a spreadsheet. And I showed him a really fast way to do that versus like having to do it manually on each row. He was amazed at how fast I did it. I showed him how to do it, but then the next time he had to do it, he was just going back to doing it the same old way. So it was too hard for him to learn the new way. It didn't click, but he knew how to do it the other way and it worked. So even though it took him twice as long, he's still going to do that. And that's human nature, right? And so that's what we're battling up against as technologists trying to release a new product or advance our technology. We have to focus on the end user. This is the reason why we will not see things become obsolete that we build today in 3 to 4 years, because once they adopt it, they're not going to let it go, even when we want them to. So how do you do this? How do you think about this differently? I mean, this isn't necessarily an architectural model. I would say it's more of a mindset. Hub and spoke isn't a new term. You've probably heard it across many different things, MDM and otherwise. But I would challenge you, and we do this at Think, it's to think of the hub as being the main part of your solution. And in a lot of cases, across different industries, this might be legacy technology that you can't sunset. This is really, really common in the insurance industry. It's very common in the hospitality industry, actually, that I'm in right now. There are these very old like GDS systems and CRS systems that deal with like global distribution of guest rooms, like when you go and book something on bookings.com, for example. The stuff in the back end that they're talking to that has now been abstracted by APIs is very, very old. I mean, like we're talking 50 years in some cases. We don't know that, right? When we go into bookings.com or Kayak, we don't know that these systems are these horrific mainframes, and that actually in the back end, there's these edifact files being, tossed around to be able to exchange information. We don't see that because we've abstracted it, because that's sort of the hub that's back there. And so they've built a spoke for us to be able to interact the way that we need to today. And so that's sort of the parallel I want you to draw is there's a way to do this in abstract user experience so that you're targeting that end user stakeholder. And that's what we do at Think. We think about each job to be done, each end user, and what are they trying to do? Because we build an app on Salesforce, but Salesforce can be difficult to adopt, honestly. It's super easy to do a lot of amazing things with Salesforce. It's a great database in the cloud. They've had some great advancements on just sort of the base user interface going from classic to lightning. But if you're not careful, you can still kind of create a mess or create inconsistency where it's really tough for users, especially users that have different specific targeted jobs, to kind of go into the same system and figure out what it is they're supposed to do. It's functional. And we have this challenge in some parts of our app today, right? It's functional. I can get my job done, but it's not easy. It's not fluid. I may have more steps than I need to. So how can we make it easier for them to adopt? How can we make less friction between them and the technology so these end users feel like they've got an experience that it just feels like an extension of them? And that's really the goal here. And then once you've done that, you can do whatever you want behind the scenes, right? Like, so if we decided, okay, we don't want to use Salesforce anymore, or, we don't want to do something very specific that we're doing on the back end of Salesforce, or Salesforce advances their technology, for example, because we use their platform, we can do that without impacting the end user. And that's what we have to start to think about, that true abstraction around that end user and the user experience. Um, Also not a new concept, right? I mean, we've had end-tier architecture for years, but I think somehow things have started to collapse and merge, and it's created some challenges for these users, and it's created a difficulty for us to move forward and advance our technology. So how do you do this? So we refer to this as customer-centric delivery, which is really putting the customer literally at the center of everything that we're doing, and really being focused around that and very important stakeholder. So it's not going to be surprising that a key step and pillar of this is to know your users. You can't possibly deliver technology that can be adopted by a person if you don't know who that person is. You don't know who the persona is. You don't know what their pains are. You don't know what the jobs are that they're trying to achieve. And therefore, you don't know what the value is you're bringing. Remember, I said, as we're entering the US market, we're talking to prospects and customers that are using a solution that's been around for 30 plus years. It's a solid solution. It's what you would refer to as like the Cadillac, right? It's reliable, tried and true, may not be, the fanciest thing. It's not the Tesla, but it works and it's solid and it's impressive in its own right. So what we want to be the Tesla, right? We're coming at it differently. We want to be innovative. We want to be able to do things lighter, cheaper, more effectively, faster, all of those things. But how do we convince them if we don't know who they are? So you need to really understand who are your end users and what are the jobs they're trying to do, and really think about that. Remember, I said like we rush to solution too fast as technologists because we get really excited about the technology. We just want to build. But what if we took a step back and we stayed in that problem space a little bit more? Love the problem and really understand the users and what they're trying to achieve and the outcomes they're trying, and what the pain is, right? So know your users, meet them where they are. We can't assume that we know how people are doing the jobs they're doing every day. And the challenges can be different depending on where they are. Are they doing it from their phone? Are they doing it from a tablet? Are they doing it on their desktop? Or, what are the challenges? Are they doing it in the area that they need to do things offline because they won't have a good connection to the internet? Like, these are the things we need to consider because it makes a difference on how we design the user experience for them and how the end user is going to be able to get value and adopt our solution. And then how do we connect with them? So we know who they are, we know where they're doing the jobs that they're doing, but how do we really connect with them so that they can give us feedback fast? So, listening to your users is something that's important, but how do you do that? How do you create those feedback loops? Without a feedback loop, and that means the feedback that we might not want to hear, right? Without a feedback loop, you won't know if anyone's using your product. I have a saying like in support, if you are not getting any cases, that's not a good thing. Because it doesn't mean that there's no problems. It could mean that no one's actually using the product. So, support, they unfortunately get to hear a lot of the things that are broken or things that don't work the way they expect or things they want to see changed. But I think that's an amazing feedback loop. And I feel like once we stop hearing those things, then we should be worried. It's the feedback you're not getting that really should scare you. So feedback loops aren't scary. They are actually beneficial. They're how you evolve your product and how you know that you've started to achieve adoption or people are struggling with adoption. This is how you get that information. Creating with your users, I call this like inclusive design. Might be because of my affinity for diversity and inclusion, but in inclusive design meaning I'm not building it for someone, I'm building it with them. There's a big difference. It's subtle, but it's impactful. I was, like I mentioned, an engineer for many years back in the days of waterfall development, where that was pretty much what you did. I would sit in my cubicle, classic, with my headphones, listening to music, coding my heart out. I would do that based on a 50-page spec that sat on my desk that came from product management. I usually synthesized that into maybe a 25-page spec that was, the technical specifications of how I planned, the pseudocode version of what I planned to build. And then I would go to town and I would just start building it. By the time those specs were written, approved, reviewed, synthesized into technical specifications, approved, reviewed, delivered as product, and went to market, a lot of times, unfortunately, sadly to say, a lot of times what I delivered wasn't really well received by the user community. And over time, this is an age-old story. It's not unique to me or the situation. It's because the time to value between when those product specifications were written by our product management team and the time it got in the user hands, things changed. That's one reason. The market changes, people's needs changes, technology changes, their expectations change because they see things that are different. And there was this game of telephone, right? By the time it got to me, it had already been somewhat synthesized from what the feedback loop was. Then I synthesized it into my interpretation of that. And regardless of the review cycles, by the time it was delivered, it was a little bit different than what maybe the original intention was. And maybe we didn't spend so much time. We spent too much time in that sort of deliberation phase around designing without getting something in front of an end user. So that's a challenge, and it's still a challenge out there. But I believe if we are more agile and we are more iterative in our feedback loops, we eliminate some of that happening. It won't go away, but at least we eliminate it because we're aware of it. So creating with your users is that. It's exactly that. It's engaging with users, getting them something early and often so that they can give you feedback. I think we're afraid a little bit of feedback sometimes because we may get feedback that doesn't make sense. We may get feedback that is interpreted as pretty expensive on our side. And I think the challenge there is all feedback is good. That's what I always say to my team. All feedback is good, even the stuff that you don't want to hear, because you'll learn from it. But that doesn't mean that you have to accept all feedback and deliver that. It's actually a great thing when you're able to say, hey, you know what? I hear what you're saying, but we're actually not going to deliver that. And you have good reasons why that is, or you have an alternative for them. Some of the feedback that we hear sometimes really results in training opportunities, right? It's not that we can't do what we can't, the users can't do what they think that they want to do. It's that they don't know how to do it with our product. It exists. The good news is the functionality is there. The bad news is it's clearly not intuitive, right? But that's again great feedback. So sometimes the feedback around, can you add this, or can you put this, or my favorites are always like, can you add a checkbox, or can you add a button? I'm like, all right, well, let's talk about what you're actually trying to achieve versus the solution. So don't be afraid of feedback. I think embrace all feedback because that's how you know people are actually using the product, which if you don't get that feedback, is a pretty good chance they're not. So now you know sort of how to embrace that. And there's a lot of work there. So I'm not going to lie when to say, oh, it's super easy and it's not going to require more time and you're going to get to market faster. It's actually is going to cause more time. You are going to have to spend time and invest time in it. So anytime that or anyone asks you to invest your time in something, you should ask, well, what's the ROI on that? Like, what am I going to get from it? And so here's some of the things that you will get from it as a solution provider, as a developer, as someone that's trying to deliver something to market or sell something. You're going to get reduced training costs, which is also beneficial for you, right? So you're going to be able to see adoption faster because why? You're building with these users. They're going to feel like they were part of the project, part of the delivery, part of the product. They're not going to need as much training because you've built with them. So it's super intuitive. You're going to accelerate user adoption because they're going to want to be along for the ride. So they're going to jump on board very quickly. And then my favorite part is around optimizing team workflows. You're going to discover things that you didn't imagine when you first went to build. And so those are the fun times where you're like, didn't realize that was part of the requirements, but as you sat and built with users and spent more time getting their feedback, you realize they had problems that you didn't even realize, and you're able to deliver even more value and optimize workflows, which are these sort of like aha moments or moments of delight, if you will. And those make you really sticky with that end user community because they feel like you get them, you understand their pain, and you were able to solve problems you didn't originally set out to solve. And then finally, increase user retention. So I always say successful implementation of a product or project, et cetera, is not equal to successful adoption. One is not equal to the other, right? That just because you feel successful, check the box, I delivered it, that product release went out, I feel good about it. If no one ever uses it, that's not success. That's successful adoption is a whole nother phase. And then I also say successful adoption doesn't equal successful retention. So maybe you do get like that hockey stick of growth and people start adopting it really fast. You see a great end user community embracing it. You even hear feedback, but then all of a sudden the feedback drops off. And then you don't see as much statistics in people using your app. And then you haven't retained them. Why? You got to really look at why that is. So adoption doesn't also equal retention. You have to continue to listen. You have to continue to evolve and make sure that the users are still getting value and being successful from your product. But if you do it right, these are the results that you'll see, which has a financial impact and a business impact on what you're trying to do. So how do you measure this? I mentioned that I didn't want to share all this sort of touchy-feely things without giving you some concrete framework to measure this. Google has a great one. I think they established this back in 2007, I believe. It's been around for a while. And it's like, how do you measure user experience? People get sort of hung up on that. They're like, well, is it just asking the users, do you like my solution? Is it measuring usage? Well, it's sort of all of these things, right? But there's some specific things that you can call out in Google's Heart framework that I really love. So part of it is sort of emotional, right? Like the happiness. How do users feel about your product? I love asking users the question, and you could send out like a 1-question survey. It's like, how would you feel if I took think away? And I love to hear people, if they're like, oh my God, I wouldn't be able to do my job, or our business wouldn't run without it. Like, these are really validating things, right? You're like, okay, good. Then we're doing something that's business critical. We're creating value, and the users feel it because they couldn't imagine their life and their job without it. So great question to ask to find out like how your users feeling about it is really to say, what if I took it away? Engagement, like measuring how frequently your users, and there's lots, depending on what you're building, there's lots of ways to do this programmatically. How are your users engaging with your product? Are they coming back every day? How many active users do you have on a daily basis? Are they the same users? Like, looking at that makes a big difference. How many become regular users? So again, like, is your user count increasing? Are people adopting the solution over time? We talked about retention. How many people are you losing? Like, measuring churn is really important as well. And then how are they achieving those jobs to be done that we talked about when we wanted to get to know them? And are they doing it quickly and easily? How are we measuring their success? Like, their individual task success. So if you understand them in the beginning and you follow some of the methodologies that I talked about, then you're going to know who the user are, what their jobs are, the pain that they're suffering. And then you can sort of measure, like, okay, if I understand those jobs and I can quantify them in my application programmatically, then I know the speed to which they're getting those jobs achieved, and I'm able to see that. And then obviously asking them where there still is pain and listening to the feedback loop. Is it easy for them to do? Is it intuitive? So I'm a big fan of shadowing users and doing those sorts of usability exercises without helping them, just to watch them. And you can do it, virtually now as well, which is great. Let's see. Give them say, go do your job, whatever that job is, and then give them the product and watch them. Don't help them, don't train them. How intuitive can they just do what they need to do? That's a great test for this task success. Because if they can do it without you explaining it to them, wow, that's gold, right? And they're going to be much more likely to adopt the solution, be engaged in it every day because it's just so easy, right? It's as easy as picking up your iPhone. I know that's the example we always say, like, if we could just have everything be as easy as my 2-year-old finding my iPhone and being able to get online and play a game, wouldn't that be amazing? And that's what we're really targeting, right? Is like, how do we take away the friction so that someone can get between their initial goal of doing something to the outcome? And I highly recommend kind of thinking about things this way. This will give you sort of the measurement around how do I achieve things and how do I measure that I'm actually getting to the outcomes that I want to get to. So if you want to reach out to me, if you have other questions, I just wanted to put this up here for a second so that you could snap that, kind of find me in all the different places, wherever you want to reach me. I'm happy to talk about all things diversity and inclusion, usability, user experience. And I want to make sure I also leave you with this parting thought because it's really, really important. Successful implementation does not equal successful adoption. And again, remember, executive buy-in is important, but end user buy-in equally, if not more important, to be able to be successful here and really make people adopt your solution.
Right. Thank you very much. And
you're welcome.
So this is a early morning for you, and have a good day and have a good weekend.
Yes, you too.
Okay,
you too. And
thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes, we will. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.